At our wedding, my in-laws were visibly drunk, but they didn't seem to care about the whispers and side glances from the guests. They suddenly began shouting at me, making a scene. "It's too late now that you're married," they bellowed. "But if you want to be part of this family, you need to show us you have enough money." They didn't stop there. "Your dad's right," they added. "You need to give us $2,000 a month as a sort of bonus." I stood there, stunned by their outrageous demands. I couldn't believe this was happening at my own wedding reception. My face must have gone pale because I felt completely speechless. Before I could respond, my father stepped in, grabbing the microphone from them. "Enough is enough. Don't you see you're making fools of yourselves?" he said, his voice stern but calm. "My name is Aspen, and I'm 28 years old. I work in an office, and my life has been pretty normal until I met Grayson, who is now my husband. He's 30, and we were introduced by a mutual friend who thought I needed to get out there more. I'd been single for quite a while, and she thought we might hit it off. After dating for a year, Grayson proposed, and now we're married. Growing up, life wasn't easy after I lost my mom at a young age. My father raised me all by himself, working tirelessly to make sure I had everything I needed. Although we had a good life, the absence of my mother left a deep hole in my heart. Losing her hurt me more than words can describe, and because of that, I became very protective of my emotions. I didn't date much, and I convinced myself that it was fine to remain single forever. Then Grayson came into my life. At first, I wasn't particularly interested in him romantically. He asked me out several times, but I just didn't feel that spark. But Grayson was patient and kind. He never pressured me, and over time, I found myself opening up to him. Eventually, we started dating, and the more time we spent together, the more I realized how special he was to me. He treated me with such care, and for the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely happy. As our relationship grew, I started thinking about the future. Grayson made me feel safe and loved. He'd often tell me, "Don't worry, Aspen. If you ever feel unsure, I'll be here until you're ready." His words touched me deeply, and when he finally proposed, it was easy for me to say yes. I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him. When I told my dad the good news, he was overjoyed. Tears welled up in his eyes as he hugged me. "Aspen, you're really getting married. I'm so happy for you," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Oh, Dad, don't be so dramatic," I teased, trying to lighten the mood, though I could feel the emotion rising within me too. "I was starting to think you might never get married," my dad confessed, still smiling through his tears. "I didn't know you were worried about that," I replied, surprised. "Well, every father worries about his daughter," he said with a sigh, "but congratulations." I hugged him again, feeling so fortunate to have such a supportive dad. The thought of him walking me down the aisle and crying during my wedding day made me laugh a little inside. He was already tearing up just talking about it. Grayson and I dove into the whirlwind of wedding planning, which turned out to be much more hectic than either of us had imagined. We were both juggling full-time jobs, and it seemed like there were never enough hours in the day to get everything done. Weekdays were filled with work, and our weekends were packed with appointments, tastings, and endless planning. It felt like we didn't even have a moment to breathe. One day, on a rare weekend off, we were supposed to visit Grayson's parents. I was about to meet them for the very first time, which made me incredibly nervous. Grayson had already met my father shortly after proposing, but scheduling a visit with his parents had been tricky due to their busy lives. Finally, after weeks of trying, we managed to arrange a time. As we pulled up to their house, my nerves kicked in hard. I could feel the anxiety building in my chest. Grayson must have noticed because he turned to me and said, "Don't worry, Aspen. My parents are really kind." His reassurance helped a bit, and I took a deep breath as we rang the doorbell. Grayson's mom opened the door, greeting him warmly. "Welcome home, Grayson," she said with a bright smile. But as soon as her eyes landed on me, her tone shifted. Her smile faded, and she looked me up and down, almost as if she were sizing me up. "So, you're Aspen," she said, her voice suddenly much cooler. It felt more like an evaluation than a greeting. She led us into the living room, where her cold demeanor didn't change. Then came the questions. "Aspen, What exactly do you bring to the table? She asked, her voice sharp. Grayson is our only child, and he's very important to us. If you're going to marry him, you need to prove that you're good enough. Are you even worthy of him? Her interrogation took me completely by surprise. I hadn't expected to be questioned like this, especially not by my future mother-in-law. I was speechless, unsure of how to respond. I could feel her eyes burning into me, demanding an answer. You're going to be part of our family now, she continued, her tone growing more aggressive. Are you ready for that? When I tried to explain that Grayson and I would support each other in our marriage, his mother wasn't impressed. How naive. You're not just going to support each other. It's your job to support Grayson, she said sharply. You're his wife, and that's your role. You don't even know the basics. Before things could escalate further, Grayson's father, who had been sitting quietly next to her, stepped in. Honey, calm down, he said, trying to ease the tension. Then, turning to me, he added, I'm sorry, Aspen. I hope my wife's words didn't scare you. I forced a small smile and replied, It's okay, though I was rattled inside. I tried to remind myself that his mother was just being protective of her only son, and maybe she was nervous too. But as I was trying to stay calm, Grayson's brother walked in. He seemed polite and kind, speaking in a soft tone that put me at ease for a brief moment. Unfortunately, that relief didn't last. With a gentle smile, Grayson's brother said something I never expected. Actually, my wife has a point. What worries me most is that you come from a single-parent family. His comment caught me off guard. What do you mean by that? I asked, feeling confused. Well, he began, being raised by a single parent doesn't look good. It's not something that makes us excited about welcoming you into the family. It's just not ideal for our only son to marry someone with that kind of background. My heart sank. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Wait a minute, I said, struggling to contain my anger. What's wrong with being raised by a single parent? My father worked incredibly hard to raise me on his own, and I'm proud of how I was brought up. It doesn't make me any less of a person. But his brother continued, undeterred by my response. You missed out on having two parents, so there's no way you learned how to be a proper wife. How could you know how to handle things like housework and running a household? I wasn't going to let that go. Actually, I helped my father with a lot of the housework. And I can cook pretty well too, so please don't make assumptions about what I can or cannot do. Grayson's mother didn't seem to care about my defense. She looked straight at me and said, Fine, I'll allow you to marry Grayson, but there's something you need to promise. You must devote yourself completely to us because we are Grayson's parents.
Can you agree to that?
I was speechless.
What?
I managed to stammer. Since you came here to ask for our blessing, you must know your responsibilities, right? She added, her tone unyielding. Before I could respond, the conversation shifted again, and it felt like I was being completely sidelined. They were running the show, and I barely had any room to speak. Later that night, as I replayed the day in my mind, I couldn't shake the uneasiness. I decided to talk to Grayson about it. Grayson, do your parents always talk like that to people? I asked, hoping for some kind of explanation. Grayson didn't seem bothered at all. What about it? He asked casually.
I was surprised by his reaction.
I mean, the way they spoke to me.
Do they always talk like that?
I said, trying to convey my discomfort. Oh, come on. They were just seeing if you were ready for marriage. What's the big deal? He replied, still unfazed. Well, it felt like they went a bit too far. I tried to explain. But Grayson didn't seem to see it the same way. They didn't say anything wrong, Aspen. Besides, they've given us permission to marry, so it's all fine. You shouldn't worry about it. His words didn't comfort me, and it was troubling that he didn't seem to stand by my side. It was clear he was more aligned with his parents' views than mine. Sensing my unease, Grayson hugged me. Aspen, don't stress over it. My parents are just upset that their only son is getting married. It'll all be okay. Though his words were meant to reassure me, it felt like he wasn't really hearing me. They just want what's best for us, and they were probably a bit harsh because they care, he added. Maybe, I said, still feeling uneasy. But even if they have high expectations, it's not right to judge me just because I was raised by my father. That doesn't define who I am or my worth as a wife. Still, Grayson seemed convinced that his parents' concerns were valid. While I couldn't shake the discomfort, I decided not to dwell too much on their opinions. After all, this was our marriage, not theirs. The day of the wedding arrived, and despite everything, it was a beautiful ceremony. We were surrounded by friends, family, and colleagues, all there to celebrate our love. My dad walked me down the aisle, and as Grayson and I exchanged vows and rings, the applause from the guests made everything feel magical. For the first time, I truly felt the joy of marrying Grayson. The reception was filled with laughter and happiness. We shared memories with old friends and enjoyed the heartfelt congratulations from our guests. Despite my earlier concerns about Grayson's parents, I was glad we had gone through with the wedding. It felt like a day I would cherish forever. As the evening went on, it was time for the final part of the event, where both sets of parents were supposed to stand with us and greet the guests. But as I stood there, I noticed something unsettling. Grayson's parents were swaying on their feet, their faces flushed red from too much alcohol. They were clearly drunk, and some of the relatives began whispering, asking if they were all right. Despite the embarrassment, we had to finish the ceremony. The moderator handed the microphone to Grayson and me, and we stood there, trying to keep everything together while his parents made it painfully obvious that they'd had too much to drink. Suddenly, Grayson's mother grabbed my hand away from him, and with a voice like a wrestler issuing a challenge, she shouted, "Listen up, Aspen. After this wedding, you're going to devote yourself entirely to us. Get ready, because we're going to test you, and it won't be easy." The guests began whispering among themselves. Some thought it was a joke and chuckled nervously, but I wasn't laughing. Then, Grayson's father grabbed the microphone. "Aspen, don't you feel embarrassed wearing a dress like that?" "It doesn't suit you at all," he said with a smirk. "Tell her the truth, dear." His mother chimed in, echoing his rude comment. The whispers around the room shifted to murmurs of shock. I looked to Grayson, hoping he would step in and stop his parents' humiliating remarks. But instead, Grayson just shook his head. "I can't stop them, Aspen. They aren't doing anything wrong," he said. In that moment, the realization hit me hard. Grayson would never stand up for me. He would never protect me from his parents. Even though the reception hall was buzzing with noise, I felt a cold clarity settle in. My in-laws, who were clearly drunk, continued their tirade. "You're already married, but if you want to be part of this family, you'll have to prove you've got money," they demanded. "Yes, that's right," they added. "Once you register your marriage, you should give us a few $1,000s every month, plus your entire work bonus." I was stunned. I couldn't believe they were saying these things, and at my wedding no less. I stood there in shock, my face growing pale, unable to respond. That's when my father stepped in. He took the microphone from them and firmly said, "Enough of this. Don't you see you're making fools of yourselves?" Grayson's parents turned to my father, glaring at him. "Why are you interrupting us? We knew this woman's father would be no good. Single parents are never any good," they spat out insultingly. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How dare they insult my father, the man who had raised me single-handedly and given me everything. But my father, ever calm, replied, "You're even worse than I expected. You wouldn't even meet me because I'm a single father. I never thought people like you would work for President Scott. He's a man of great character. I figured his employees would be just as respectable." At that, Grayson's father's face went pale. He grew serious. How do you know President Scott?" he stammered. "My company does business with him, and more importantly, he's an old friend," my father explained. And speaking of single parents, President Scott was raised by his mother alone. "So, you've just insulted the very man you work for." The room went silent as my in-laws processed what my father had said. Their expressions quickly shifted to panic. Grayson's father, now visibly shaken, dropped to his knees. "Please, I'm begging you, don't tell the president about this," he pleaded. The man who had been so arrogant just moments ago now looked utterly defeated. Guests started laughing, and I noticed some of them even pulling out their phones to record the spectacle. My father stood tall and said, "No matter how much you apologize, You can't take back what you've said. He then turned to me and asked, Aspen, do you want to go home with me? Without hesitation, I nodded. I took the microphone from Grayson's hand and faced the crowd. Thank you for the entertainment, I announced, but there will be no marriage. I spoke directly to Grayson and his parents, and the entire audience. I'll make sure to return the money you gave us for this occasion. With that, I left the reception hall with my father by my side. As we walked away, I caught one last glimpse of Grayson and his parents, their faces full of shock and disbelief. Soon after, their relatives rushed to their side, their expressions full of worry and confusion. The hall had descended into chaos. In the following days, I personally returned the money to all the guests who had given us gifts. Every single one of them expressed sympathy for me. Some even praised my dad and me for standing up to such awful people. I felt grateful for their support. As for Grayson, things didn't go so well. Word spread quickly through his company about what had happened at the wedding, and he became known as the guy with impossible parents. It wasn't long before he became the target of criticism at work, not only for his weak character, but also for failing to stand up for himself. Eventually, the shame became too much for him, and he resigned. President Scott, of course, found out about the entire situation. Grayson's father, who had once been so proud, was demoted and sent to work in a small, insignificant office in the countryside. His career, like his dignity, was in shambles. I later heard that Grayson's family had been ostracized by their own relatives because of the disgraceful way they behaved at the wedding. It was sad, but in truth, they had brought it upon themselves. In the meantime, I've been focusing on strengthening my relationship with my dad. We've been spending more time together, and it's helped me realize just how much he's done for me. One day, he sat me down for a serious conversation. Aspen, have you ever thought about running the family business? He asked, his eyes filled with both hope and expectation. Wait, what? I stammered, unsure where this was going. Why don't you work toward becoming the president of the company? He suggested, offering me a role I had never seriously considered before. It was a big step, and the thought of it made me both excited and nervous. I'll do my best, I promised him, feeling a mix of emotions. From that moment on, I decided to focus on my career rather than getting caught up in romantic relationships. I wanted to prove to myself and my father that I could excel, and perhaps one day, lead the company. Since then, I've been immersing myself in work, learning everything I can about the business. It's challenging but fulfilling, and I'm determined to make the most of the opportunity my dad has given me. Looking back on the whole wedding fiasco, it's clear that Grayson's parents were unreasonable from the start. They took what should have been a beautiful day and turned it into a nightmare. But fortunately, since the marriage was never officially registered, I avoided a huge mistake. Now, free from any marital ties and toxic in-laws, I can focus on building my future and career. Out of a chaotic situation came clarity, and I'm excited to see where life takes me next. I'm optimistic about the future, and I'm proud of the path I'm now walking. Thank you for sticking with me through the story, and if you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing. I hope to see you in the next video.